Let me tell you about the time I found out my wife, Rachel, had been unfaithful. Yeah, I know, it's one of those things you never think will happen to you, until it does. We'd been together for over 10 years, married for almost a decade, and I truly believed we were solid. Sure, like any couple, we had our ups and downs, but this never crossed my mind. And that's the cruel part, right? You never see it coming. It all kicked off when my best friend Jason reached out to me out of nowhere. One evening, he invited me to grab a drink, which was pretty normal for us, but there was something off in his voice. Jason and I go way back, so I can usually tell when something's up. We met at a quiet bar, had a few drinks, and exchanged some small talk. After a bit, he dropped the bomb on me. "I need to tell you something, man. You're not going to like it," he said, staring down at his beer like it had all the answers. I braced myself, knowing something was about to shatter my world. At first, he hesitated, clearly not wanting to be the one to break my heart, but he pushed on. He told me he had seen Rachel at a restaurant. Nothing too odd about that, right? But she wasn't alone. She was with some other guy, and Jason swore it didn't look innocent. Then he hit me with the worst part. He saw them kissing, and it wasn't just a quick peck on the cheek. It was something deeper. He knew it, and I could tell from the way he was telling me that this wasn't some misunderstanding. In that moment, I felt like someone had just slammed a baseball bat into my chest. My first instinct was to deny it, to convince myself there had to be another explanation, that there was no way Rachel would do something like that to me. But as much as I wanted to push it away, I could feel a pit forming in my stomach. A part of me knew Jason wasn't lying or exaggerating. He wouldn't do that to me. A whole storm of emotions hit me at once. Anger, confusion, betrayal. How could this be happening? Rachel and I had built a life together, and now she was out there with some guy, kissing him behind my back. How long had this been going on? Was this a one-time mistake? Or had I been living a lie for who knows how long? I couldn't help but replay every moment with her over the past few weeks, trying to find the signs I missed. Every smile, every kiss, every time she came home late or seemed distant. It all started to feel like a puzzle I wasn't smart enough to put together. But I'm not the type to act on impulse. My first thought wasn't to confront her. At least, not yet. No, I wanted to let this simmer for a while, to be strategic about how I handled this. If I was going to tear apart my marriage, I wanted to make sure I came out on top. Revenge fantasies started swirling in my head almost immediately. I wasn't about to let her get away with this, but I had no clue how to make her feel the pain she put me through. The days that followed were torture, pretending everything was normal when I felt like I was dying inside. Every time she smiled at me, it made me want to scream. I couldn't even look at her without imagining her with that guy. And she had no idea I knew. She just kept acting like nothing had changed, like she wasn't lying to me every day. But the worst part? I still loved her. Or at least, I thought I did. I was angry, sure, but part of me couldn't believe she would really do this to me. I kept telling myself maybe Jason was wrong. Maybe he'd misread the situation. But deep down, I knew the truth. Then, about a week later, Rachel dropped a bombshell of her own. We were having dinner, just the two of us, when she started talking about open relationships. I nearly choked on my food. I mean, we'd been married for over 10 years, and now she wanted to bring this up? At first, I thought she was joking or just trying to sound edgy. But no, she was dead serious. She started rambling about how modern couples were exploring open marriages and how it could be refreshing for us. Refreshing? The woman had been sneaking around behind my back, and now she wanted my blessing to keep doing it. The nerve. It hit me like a freight train. This was her way of covering her tracks. She didn't want just one guy. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too. And she thought I was stupid enough to go along with it. A wave of disgust washed over me. She was trying to manipulate me, turning her affair into something progressive, brilliant in a twisted way. Instead of admitting what she'd done, she was rebranding it as something modern and open-minded. What a joke. I wanted to explode. I wanted to flip the table over and shout that I knew everything. But I didn't. I kept my rage in check, kept my face as neutral as I could, and told her it sounded like a good idea. I saw the surprise flash across her face for just a second, but she recovered quickly and smiled like she'd just won some kind of prize. In that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do. By agreeing to her open relationship idea, I'd bought myself time. Time to come up with a plan to tear her world apart. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making her feel every bit of the pain she had put me through. And trust me, I had ideas. But that's for later. Right now, I had to keep pretending like everything was fine while secretly setting the stage for the ultimate payback. She had no clue what was coming. She thought she had outsmarted me, that she was in control. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like Rachel always think they're the smartest person in the room, until they're not. After agreeing to her ridiculous open relationship idea, I knew I had the upper hand. The clock was ticking. The question wasn't if I was going to get my revenge, but how. Rachel had no idea what was coming. It wasn't enough to just catch her cheating and walk away. I wanted her to feel the same sting of betrayal she had thrown at me. So, I started plotting, and it all kicked off with Emily. Emily and Rachel had been best friends for years. The kind of best friends who share everything, every little detail of their lives. I couldn't have a conversation with my wife without it getting reported back to Emily. But here's the twist. Rachel had kept her affair a secret from Emily. I figured it was probably out of shame, or because she didn't want to admit she was doing the same thing she once called unforgivable when it happened to their friends. Either way, this rift between them was a golden opportunity, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. I knew if I played my cards right, Emily could be the key to unraveling everything, the perfect tool to take Rachel down. So, I set up a meeting with Emily under the guise of wanting to talk about Rachel's suggestion for an open relationship. Emily didn't think twice. I think part of her was just curious, and maybe a little protective of Rachel, too. She probably thought I was a confused husband who needed some guidance on how to embrace my wife's new ideas. We met at a quiet cafe, nothing too flashy, but just the kind of place where you can have a serious conversation without being interrupted. As we sat down and ordered our drinks, I could tell Emily was ready to dive into whatever I had to say. I played it cool at first, asking about her and Rachel, like I was totally on board with this new open marriage idea. Then, without missing a beat, I brought up Rachel's suggestion of sexual exploration, framing it as a way to spice up our relationship. I've got to be honest, I said, leaning back in my seat. This whole open relationship thing is something I never imagined talking about. But, maybe Rachel has a point. Maybe it's time for something new. Emily's reaction was exactly what I wanted. Her eyes widened, and I could almost see the gears turning in her head. She was caught off guard but intrigued. Well, Rachel's mentioned before that couples who try new things can be healthier, Emily said, sipping her latte. She thinks it could be refreshing. Exactly, I said, nodding like I was some enlightened, progressive husband. I could feel the air shifting. She was warming up to the idea, and that's when I knew it was time to strike. Actually, I continued, lowering my voice a little. Rachel had another thought. Since we're all friends, she thought maybe you and I could explore, something together. Emily froze. For a moment, I honestly thought she was going to spit out her coffee. Her face was a mix of disbelief and hesitation, like she didn't know whether to laugh or run. Wait, what? She stammered, still trying to brush it off. You're telling me that Rachel suggested you and I? I leaned in, giving her a bit more of that I'm serious energy. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice calm. I know it sounds crazy, but that's kind of the whole point of this open relationship thing, right? Trying new things with people you trust. I could tell Emily was already thinking it through, justifying it in her head. It wasn't the idea that was making her hesitate. It was the idea of crossing that line, of doing something taboo. Well, I don't know, she said, playing with her coffee cup nervously. This feels weird. I don't think Rachel would be okay with it. She was classic Emily, always the good friend, always trying to do the right thing, but I could tell she was tempted. Trust me, I said, keeping my tone firm and sure. She suggested it. She wants us to give it a shot, and since we're friends, she thought it might be a good idea for us to start there. I could see her walls beginning to crack. She was still trying to hold back, but I could feel the temptation creeping in. Maybe a part of her still thought it was too weird, but I knew another part was secretly excited. This was about more than me. It was about the thrill, the rush of doing something forbidden, something she never thought she'd consider. I knew I had her at this point. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, her mind clearly racing. Then, I pushed. "Come on, Emily," I said, leaning in just a little closer. "Haven't you ever wondered what it would be like, just once? No pressure, no strings." Rachel wouldn't even have to know. The struggle was clear in her eyes, the battle between what felt right and what felt exciting. After a couple more drinks and a bit of playful banter, she finally gave in. Maybe just once," she whispered, almost as if she couldn't believe she was saying it. That's when I knew I had her. With Emily, I now had the perfect weapon to take down Rachel. It was game on. Emily didn't know it yet, but she had just walked right into the middle of the biggest mess of her life. The best part? Rachel had no idea her best friend was about to become an unwitting pawn in my revenge. I could already picture it, the fallout, the destruction of their friendship, and the double betrayal that would hit Rachel harder than anything I'd felt. I smiled at Emily, thanked her for the conversation, and walked out of the cafe, knowing that I'd just set the stage for my next move. Rachel thought she was playing me for a fool, but she was about to learn the hard way what happens when you push someone too far. Now all I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to strike. And believe me, when that moment came, it was going to be glorious. Now that I had Emily in the game and the stage set for Rachel's ultimate betrayal, it was time to turn my attention to the other half of this messed-up equation, her lover. He thought he was safe, sneaking around with another man's wife, thinking he could get away with it. Well, he was about to find out what happens when you mess with the wrong guy. I brought Jason back into the loop. He was already on board with helping me. This next step would take some finesse. Jason had connections, people who could dig up information no one else could. I didn't even know the guy's name yet, but that was about to change. With a few quick calls, Jason tracked the guy down. We dug up just enough to put my plan into motion. We set up a meeting, making it look like a casual, friendly get-together. The guy had no idea what he was walking into. Jason made sure it seemed like nothing was out of the ordinary, just a couple of guys catching up over drinks. When we got to the bar where we'd arranged to meet, I sized him up immediately. He wasn't anything special, tall, fit, the typical smug look of someone who thought they were better than the rest of us. I could see why Rachel was drawn to him. He had that polished, charming vibe, but I could also tell he was the type to crumble when the heat was on. And that's exactly what I planned to do. We exchanged some small talk, ordered drinks, and I let Jason take the lead. The whole time, I kept my cool. The last thing I wanted was to tip him off. It wasn't time to confront him yet. First, we needed to make sure he understood the situation. Jason, smooth as always, started dropping little hints here and there. He didn't outright accuse the guy, but he danced around the topic, mentioning dates, places, and a restaurant where Rachel and the guy had been spotted. I could see the guy's body language change. He stiffened, starting to realize that we weren't just here to grab beers. At one point, I caught him glancing at his phone, probably wondering if Rachel had texted him or if he was just itching to get out of there. That's when I leaned forward, locking eyes with him for the first time during the conversation. "You know," I said, my voice calm but carrying weight, "I've got this weird situation going on. Seems like my wife's been a little too friendly with someone lately." His face went pale, and I could tell he understood exactly what I meant. But before he could deny it or say anything, I pressed on. "Don't get me wrong," I added. "I'm not here to make a scene. That's not really my style." I paused for a moment, letting the tension hang in the air. "But there's something you need to know." I watched his expression shift as I delivered the next line. "I know about your date with her. That little rendezvous? It's not going to happen." His eyes widened, caught completely off guard. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice shaky as he tried to play dumb. But the crack in his voice gave him away. He was nervous, and rightfully so. Jason leaned back casually, but with a deadly seriousness in his voice. "We're not asking," he said, his tone sharp. "We're telling you. Cancel that date. Stop answering her calls. If you don't, things are going to get uncomfortable. And trust me, you don't want that." The guy fumbled with his drink, trying to cover up the fact that his hands were shaking. It was almost pathetic how quickly his confident mask started to fall away. He could sense we weren't joking. that this wasn't some empty threat. He was trying to figure out his next move. But the truth was, he didn't have any options. His only choice was to back off and hope we didn't escalate things further. For a few long moments, he didn't say a word. Just sat there, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. Finally, he muttered, yeah, all right. I won't show up. I won't answer her anymore. I could already see the gears turning in his head. He wasn't just scared of me and Jason. He was probably starting to realize just how deep he was in this mess. And the fear of the unknown was eating him alive. Perfect. With that confirmation, Jason and I exchanged a brief look. We'd gotten what we came for, and I knew I'd just taken the first major step toward crumbling Rachel's little fantasy world. The guy practically bolted out of the bar, looking like he couldn't get out fast enough. Watching him leave, I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. Rachel had no idea what was coming. I could already picture her sitting alone, waiting for her lover to show up, completely clueless that her little affair was about to fall apart. As we finished our drinks, Jason chuckled. Man, did you see his face? He looked like he was about to piss himself. I laughed too, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Sure, confronting the guy felt good, but it wasn't enough. Rachel wasn't going to get away with this so easily. This was just the beginning. On the drive home, my mind was racing with thoughts of what came next. The revenge, the unraveling of her trust. Everything I'd been planning was so close now, yet still felt so far away. But knowing that her lover had been scared off was a small victory. She was about to experience frustration on a whole new level, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. Now that he was out of the picture, it was time to turn up the heat on Rachel. I could already picture her sitting there, confused, wondering why her lover hadn't shown up. Maybe she'd start doubting him. Maybe she'd even start doubting herself. The irony was almost too sweet. But this was just the start of her nightmare. What came next was going to tear her world apart, piece by piece. And I wasn't just going to sit back and watch. I was going to be in the thick of it, making sure every second of her downfall stung as much as possible. I'll never forget the night everything finally came crashing down. It was the night I'd been working toward for weeks. And honestly, I hadn't been this excited about anything in a long time. Rachel, completely unaware of the storm I was about to unleash, had gone out for her date. Like everything was business as usual. She thought she was going to spend another evening with her lover, playing me for a fool while pretending her little open relationship idea was something I had actually bought into. What she didn't know was that her boy toy wasn't showing up. He was probably too busy trying to keep his composure after our conversation. I had no intention of sitting around feeling sorry for myself while Rachel was off playing her games. I was done being the clueless, passive husband. I'd set everything up just the way I wanted it. After sending her off with a weak kiss and a fake smile, I called Emily over. She walked in completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Emily thought we were going to explore the idea of this so-called open relationship that Rachel had introduced. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, but I knew that wouldn't last long. Once the wine started flowing, I made sure the environment was just right. Candles lit, soft music playing. Everything that used to be exclusive to Rachel and me. Tonight, it was mine to share with Emily. We chatted, laughed, and sipped our drinks. But soon the conversation began to drift toward deeper, more personal topics. The tension between us was thick, and I could feel Emily waiting for me to make the first move. So, I did. The shift was swift. One moment we were talking casually, the next we were all over each other. It wasn't about Emily. It was about making a statement. This was about Rachel, about taking something from her, about showing her that I could play the game, too. It wasn't about lust. It was about revenge. Just as things reached their peak, I heard the sound of the front door opening. Rachel was back earlier than expected, probably because her date with Loverboy hadn't gone as planned. I heard the click of the door and the sound of her heels on the floor. And you know what? I wasn't panicking. There was no rush to cover up, no shame to hide. I wanted her to see this. I wanted her to walk in on me, to feel the sting of betrayal I'd been living with. I wanted to make sure she knew exactly what she had done to me. And sure enough, the bedroom door swung open, and there she was, standing in the doorway. Her face, I'll never forget the look on her face. It was a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. Her mouth hung open, her eyes wide. She never imagined that I would be capable of this. But there I was, with her best friend in my bed. "What the hell?" she shouted, her voice full of disbelief. Emily, frozen in panic, scrambled to gather her clothes. She looked completely out of place, not knowing whether to flee or stay. "Rachel, I didn't mean," Emily stammered, her face crimson with embarrassment. She couldn't even look Rachel in the eye as she tried to back out of the room. Without another word, Emily bolted, clearly running for her life. That left me and Rachel, face to face, with nowhere to hide. The door slammed behind Emily, and the silence that followed felt like a ticking clock. The storm was about to hit, and when it did, it was a lot more than I expected. "You filthy bastard!" Rachel screamed, charging toward me with her fists clenched. The fury in her eyes was the same fire I once loved, but now it was aimed directly at me. "You slept with my best friend in our bed. How dare you? You hypocrite!" she spat. I couldn't help but chuckle. Her hypocrisy was almost laughable. She was standing there, accusing me of the very thing she'd been doing for weeks, with no sense of irony. I got out of bed, leaving myself completely exposed. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the betrayal, just as I had. "Are you serious right now, Rachel?" I shot back, my voice thick with sarcasm. "You've been sneaking around with some guy behind my back, and you think I'm the bad guy here?" "That's different," she screamed, her anger rising. "We agreed to an open relationship, Derek. You crossed the line." "Emily is my best friend," she added, as if that made it worse. I couldn't help but laugh again. "An open relationship?" I scoffed, stepping closer to her. "That's rich coming from you. Don't even try to play the victim here, Rachel. I know about your affair. I've known for weeks. You think I didn't see this coming? You think I didn't know exactly what you were up to?" Her face drained of color, and I could see the shock in her eyes. She realized I had been a step ahead of her the entire time. "Wait, what?" she muttered, her voice trembling. "You knew?" "Of course I fucking knew," I snapped, stepping right into her space, finally letting my anger spill over. "I knew the second Jason told me about seeing you with that guy. I knew when you came home smelling like him. And then you had the nerve to suggest this open relationship bullshit. Like I'd be dumb enough to fall for it." Her face twisted in rage, but something else started to show. Fear. Fear that she had lost control, and now she was the one caught in the web. You set this whole thing up, didn't you?" she asked, her voice shaking with realization. I nodded, not bothering to hide the satisfaction. "You're damn right I did. You think you can mess around behind my back and treat me like a fool? No, Rachel, this is your mess. You made this bed, and now you're going to lie in it." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw vulnerability. But it was too late for tears. Too late for apologies. We'd crossed the point of no return. She screamed, this guttural sound of pure rage, and stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the walls seemed to shake. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. It should have felt like victory, like I had finally gotten what I'd been waiting for. But the truth is, all I felt was emptiness. Yes, I had my revenge, but at what cost? The price was my marriage. My whole life as I knew it. I had burned everything to the ground, and now, all that was left was the ashes. After the storm had passed, I knew what came next. There was no rebuilding, no fixing what had been broken. Everything between Rachel and me was shattered beyond repair. As she simmered in the aftermath of catching me with Emily, I calmly told her the words I was sure she never thought she'd hear. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady, even though I expected her to lash out again, screaming, throwing things, trying to claw back any sense of control. But instead, for the first time that night, Rachel just stood there, stunned. I guess she didn't think I'd actually go through with it. She probably thought I'd be the one begging her to stay, hoping we could fix things. But no, the moment she betrayed me, the marriage was over. I had been waiting for the right time to act, and that time had come. "You can't be serious," she said finally, her voice shaky, but the desperation in it was unmistakable. Derek, don't do this. We can work through this. The open relationship was supposed to help us, not destroy everything. I couldn't help but laugh. She still didn't get it. She couldn't see that her idea of an open relationship wasn't a solution. It was just a way to justify her lies, to dress up her affair as something progressive when it was really just selfishness wrapped in a trendy label. Help us? Rachel, stop pretending, I said, my voice cold. You didn't want an open relationship to help us. You wanted it so you could keep sleeping around and feel good about it. You thought I'd be dumb enough to buy into your little act. But the truth is, I've known about you and your lover for weeks. Hell, even Jason knew. Her eyes widened, and for the first time that night, I saw real fear flash across her face. She realized then that this wasn't some outburst from me in the heat of the moment. This was me taking control, having watched, waited, and planned. She opened her mouth, probably to explain or make excuses, but I cut her off. Don't even try to spin this as some noble attempt to fix our marriage, I said, shaking my head in disgust. You lied to me. You cheated behind my back. And when you got caught, you tried to turn it around and act like it was for us. It's pathetic. And now it's over. She took a step toward me, her hands trembling. I made a mistake, okay? We both made mistakes. But we can fix this. I can fix this. We don't have to throw everything away. The rage inside me flared up again, but I swallowed it down. I'd been angry long enough. It was time to end this. Clean and simple. There's nothing left to fix, I said coldly. I don't trust you anymore. And without trust, there's no marriage. I'm done. Rachel broke down. She cried, pleaded, tried to explain how she had felt trapped in the marriage, how the affair was her way of feeling alive again. But none of it mattered. Every word was hollow. It sounded like the same tired excuses I had heard from other people's stories, like she was reading from a script designed to manipulate me into staying. But I wasn't playing along. I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the bed, and started packing my things. It felt surreal, like I was watching my life unravel while I methodically folded shirts into a suitcase. There was no yelling anymore, no fighting. It was done. The revenge in the moment had been satisfying. But now that the dust was settling, all I felt was emptiness. I cut off contact with both Rachel and Emily. I wasn't interested in hearing more apologies, explanations, or excuses. As far as I was concerned, they were both out of my life for good. Rachel, for obvious reasons, and Emily, well, she played her part too. She may have been dragged into this because of my manipulation, but it didn't matter. She crossed the line, and there was no going back. The divorce process was brutal, but it moved quickly. Rachel tried to fight it at first, but when she realized there was no way to salvage us, she relented. We split everything down the middle. I didn't care about the house or the money. I just wanted out. Every conversation with her lawyer felt like I was peeling off a layer of my old life, shedding it piece by piece until there was nothing left but the raw bones of who I used to be. In the end, we signed the papers, and just like that, it was over. You'd think I would have felt victorious, right? I had set my plan in motion, gotten my revenge, exposed her for the liar she was, and walked away without looking back. But the truth is, once everything was final, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt empty, like all the anger, all the hatred I'd been carrying around had burned out, leaving behind a hollow space inside me. The revenge had been sweet, but it didn't fill the void her betrayal had left behind. It didn't take away the pain or the sense of loss. I realized then that revenge wasn't the answer. It didn't heal the wounds. It just made everything harder to face. And now, all that was left was the aftermath, a life I didn't recognize, and a future that seemed uncertain at best. Sure, in the heat of the moment, it felt satisfying. But as the days passed, I realized it hadn't brought back the years we'd spent together or healed the trust that had been shattered. That was gone, and nothing I could do would ever fix it. I spent a lot of time thinking back on everything. The marriage, the way things had gone so wrong, and how I'd allowed myself to get to this point. I used to love Rachel, and maybe part of me still did. But that love had been warped by her lies, her secrets. I wasn't the same person I had been when we first met, and she wasn't the woman I had married. But now, looking at it all from the other side, I understood that the only way forward was to let go. Not just of her, but of everything. The anger, the resentment, the bitterness. It wasn't doing me any good anymore. It was just dragging me down. If I was going to move on, I had to release it all. And so, I did. I walked away from the wreckage of that part of my life, leaving behind Rachel and everything that came with her. It wasn't easy, and it sure as hell wasn't neat, but it was necessary. For the first time in forever, I felt like I had control again. I was free. But even then, a lingering question gnawed at me. Was it worth it? Maybe I'll be asking myself that for years to come. After the divorce was finalized, I found myself sitting across from Jason at a bar, shaking my head at the craziness of the past few months. We clinked our beers together and chuckled about how surreal it all felt now that it was over. Jason couldn't stop talking about how well I had planned everything, how carefully I had set it all up. "Man, I still can't believe you really did it. You made her pay," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. I chuckled along with him, but it didn't feel the way I thought it would. There was satisfaction, sure, but the truth was, it didn't feel like a victory. It didn't give me the sense of triumph I thought it would. Still, we laughed. It almost felt like we were talking about someone else's story, some crazy plotline that didn't involve me. "What's next for you?" Jason asked, leaning back and watching me closely. The question hung there, and for the first time, I didn't have a clear answer. I'd spent so long focused on Rachel and revenge, on getting even, that I hadn't really thought about what came next. The only thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't ready to dive into another relationship. The idea of being involved with anyone after everything I'd been through was repulsive. "I think I'm just going to be by myself for a while," I said, taking a slow sip of my beer. "No relationships, no drama. I need to figure things out. I need some space to breathe." Jason nodded. "Yeah, that makes sense, man. After everything, you deserve some peace." That word, peace, stuck with me. It had been so long since I'd had it. I wasn't tied down by someone else's secrets anymore, by all the lies and the mess. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could focus on myself, and it felt good. I didn't need someone else to make me happy. I needed to find that within myself. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my work. My career became my focus, my distraction from the aftermath. I needed it. I started working out again, going to the gym regularly, rediscovering hobbies I hadn't touched in years. I slowly started to figure out who I was again, outside of the person I'd been in the marriage. It was a strange feeling, realizing how much of my identity had been tied to Rachel and the life we had. Now that she was gone, it was like I was getting a second chance, like I could start over from scratch. The thought of getting involved with someone new never crossed my mind. I wasn't ready. Betrayal leaves scars, and I wasn't about to let anyone get close enough to hurt me again. Trust was something I didn't have much of anymore, not after what Rachel had done. And honestly, I wasn't in any rush to rebuild it. For the first time in a long time, I was content just being alone. Jason and I stayed close. We'd meet up, laugh about the craziness of it all. But there was this unspoken understanding now. I was different. The man who had been so open and trusting was gone. In his place was someone more cautious, more guarded. And while that might seem sad, it wasn't. It was survival. It was me finally learning how to protect myself from the kind of pain Rachel had caused me. As for Rachel, she became a distant memory. Once the divorce was finalized, I cut all contact. No texts, no calls, nothing. To me, she was a chapter in my life that had been closed for good. I didn't care about her anymore, didn't want to know what she was up to. The same went for Emily. She played her part, but I didn't want anything to do with her. I was done with both of them. Revenge had felt sweet in the moment, but in the end, it didn't fill the hole that Rachel's betrayal had left. It didn't heal the wounds, or bring back the trust. What it gave me was closure, a way to walk away from something that had been draining me for so long. And while it didn't feel like the big win I had imagined, I realized it was necessary. In the months that followed, I found peace in the simple things, the things I used to take for granted: going to work, hitting the gym, playing guitar, running. These were the things that started to put me back together, piece by piece. I didn't need Rachel or anyone else to define me. I was learning how to be content with just me. That's the lesson I took from everything. Betrayal, revenge, all of it. It's all painful, complicated. But in the end, it taught me something valuable. I didn't need someone else to make me whole. I didn't need to rebuild what had been broken. All I needed was to move forward, focus on my life, my work, and finding peace within myself. And for the first time in a long time, I had that peace. No more lies. No more manipulation. No more drama. Just me. My life. And that was enough.